Charles Fuller, Sheila Ford, and I'm going to try this one, Dennis Davies? That's it. There it is.
Congressman, the numbers tell a frightening story on the deficits and the spending. But unfortunately, with the best efforts of Congress, this problem is not going to be solved unless we do several things. We need to bring jobs back to this country. We need to penalize these corporations that send jobs overseas. We need tariffs to keep industry here. 11 million manufacturing jobs have disappeared in, I think, the last 11 years. Over 40,000 companies have went under, manufacturing companies. Now, when I look at Congress, I realize that Congress is not running this country. Congress does not represent the American people. It is the bankers on Wall Street that asked us to bail them out, bail out their gambling debts, trillions of dollars that we're on the hook for. And now the big corporations have us involved in these undeclared, unconstitutional wars in the Middle East over oil. That's what it's about. Libya has the largest reserves of oil in Africa. And there's no way we're going to get tax revenues up unless we have good paying jobs.
And I agree. You know, I mean, it's what I said earlier. There's two things that we have to do before I would even consider talking about tariffs. And I want to make sure that we understand this. Because right now, the reason these jobs are going overseas is mostly because these companies are finding better places to do business than in the United States. So what we have to do first is lower our corporate tax rate. I would like to get rid of the corporate tax rate. That's not going to happen. So I would lower it. Right now, until recently, we were the second highest in the world. Today, we are the highest because Japan, imagine what Japan just did. They realized that they were not competitive, so they lowered their corporate tax rate so they could attract more businesses. The second thing I would do is make sure we get rid of the regulatory burden that is killing companies right now. EPA, exactly. I'd like to acknowledge EPA, but that's not going to happen. So there's those two things I want to do before I even start talking about tariffs or penalizing companies. Because what companies are going to do, they're going to make rational decisions. They're going to say, which country is better for me? I have a family member who advises companies. And he tells me all the time how he cries, you know, not literally, but figuratively, when he has to tell a company that it's cheaper for them to do business in China, that it's cheaper for them to do business in Singapore, that it's cheaper for them. Now Luxembourg is the latest, greatest place to do business in. When what he really wants to do in his heart of hearts is tell them, do business in Idaho. But his job is to figure out for that company where it's going to be more profitable for them to do business. When we get rid of those two things, the high taxation and the high regulation, if we still see, then we can talk about things like tariffs or things like that. But until we do that, I don't think it actually behooves us as a nation to then penalize them more. We're penalizing them with higher taxes, higher regulation, and now we're going to penalize them even more by giving them tariffs and other things.
Well, but
we're working on it right now. We're doing the Ways and Means Committee, which is a taxation committee in the House, is actually working on legislation to try to reduce the corporate tax rate. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think that they're trying to bring it down to about 24%, which would be much significantly lower than, and then also getting rid of some of the exemptions that are out there. So it's going to be kind of a revenue neutral thing where you get rid of exemptions and you lower taxes, and we will be able to broaden the base and hopefully do something. And it's being worked on right now.
But a lot of these companies don't pay the 30 or 35%. General Electric paid nothing.
Exactly, and that's an outrage.
Exactly.
So what we need to do is get rid of those exceptions that companies like GE have, so everybody pays the same and everybody gets treated the same.
Well, one of the problems is if a corporation earns money overseas, it's tax exempt. They don't pay any taxes. That's a big advantage.
That is a big advantage.
All right, and then they want to bring it back, and Congress passes a law, oh, we'll let you bring it back for 5%. You know,
Well,
this
they have-
is absurd.
Yeah.
And Congress also finances insurance, so if these companies are nationalized, their properties overseas, the taxpayers pick up on it.
No, I'm frustrated. The fact that GE paid absolutely no taxes, in fact, they're getting some money back, should outrage every American. And I think it's incumbent upon Republicans to not just talk about lowering taxes, but taking care of those loopholes. So every company, if we decide as a nation that we want a corporate tax, I personally would not want one. But if we decide as a nation that that's what we want, then every corporation should pay that amount and not be able to hire expensive lobbyists and expensive accountants so they can get away with doing stuff that smaller corporations can't get away with. So thank you.
I just have one short thing. These statistics that we're getting out of Washington, the economic statistics, are blatant, bald-faced lies. Inflation is running at 10%. Unemployment is running north of 22%. There's a fellow, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but you should get familiar with him, John Williams, an economist, who adjusts all of these figures that are coming out. People wonder, you know, maybe Congress wonders why people hold Congress in such low esteem. Who believes this stuff coming from the government? I don't. And what happens to the senior citizens who got no increases?
No.
And they keep oil and
We need to
food.
let somebody else ask a question. Thank you.
I have one basic question. I'm not going to give a speech, but how are you going to defeat the good old boys up there in Washington? Because I call your office quite often. I'm quite friendly when you're one helper back there. He knows me by first name now. But anyway, there's 86 of you conservative people up there. Simpson votes exactly opposite to you every time.
Not every time.
Most of the time. I get emails from him, you know what he's worried about? Wolves. I wrote him back, I said, you know, there must be other problems in Washington other than wolves. So, but what I'm saying is, how do you get by that? In other words, I know what you're fighting back there because you've got the establishment back there that are in the hip pockets of the guys that are giving the money, the lobbyists. How do you get by that?
Okay. It's a great question, and it's a big question. I can only talk to you about what I did in the Idaho legislature, and also have a little bit of a reality check, because I realized the Idaho legislature is much smaller than Congress. When I went into the Idaho legislature 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago now, there was a small group of conservative House members. We were about 10 that were elected in Idaho. And we decided that we were going to work together as a group to try to change the way things were being done in Idaho. And I think we were very successful. Now, the media here in Idaho complains about it because the Idaho legislature has gotten too conservative. I don't think anything can be too conservative, but the media doesn't like it. But I think it was because these 10 freshmen were able to get together and decide that we were going to have some influence over the direction of the way things were being done in Idaho. We're trying to do the same thing in Washington, D.C. The difference is that you're talking, you know, about trillions of dollars that are being spent instead of billions of dollars here in Idaho. And you're talking about a body that is 435 individuals versus only 70 individuals here in Idaho. But we are doing that. Freshmen are getting together and trying to figure out the way Washington works. Because if you're going to be successful at defeating the incumbent, you know, defeating power in Washington and defeating what you said, the good old boys network, you have to learn how the system works. You can't just go in there with torches, you know, and try to burn the place down, although some of you probably would want me to do that. But we can't do that. So we have to figure out how the rules work, how the process works, and that's what we're looking at right now, is trying to figure out how we can use the rules and the process so we can defeat some of the things that are happening, which is some of the things that we did in the Idaho legislature. So it's just a microcosm of what's happening in DC, but we were successful, but it took us some time. It took us 1 or 2 years to figure out how the process worked, before we even started having a whole lot of influence in the legislature. But once we figured out how it worked, it turned out that we were able to change the way that things were being done in Idaho. I'm hopeful that we can do the same thing in Washington, D.C., and almost on a daily basis, you have freshmen meeting together with other freshmen saying, what are the things we're going to do, what are the things we're going to fight for, and one of the things we're fighting for is to make sure that we get what we want out of this debt ceiling vote. And we're going to see, but the reality is that you have a bunch of people in D.C. who don't want to do anything to change the way things are done. So just make sure you help me stand strong. I need your commitment and your help, because if I don't have your help, then somebody different than me is going to be there. And that's why I need you guys to go out there and work hard so people like me can get elected and re-elected. Thank you.